So, welcome back to another episode of Living the Sky Life. I have the pleasure of having Kylie Bennett on with me today. Kylie and I connected, and I was very interested in her background and her story. Kylie is the sibling to an autistic brother and also has two twin girls on the spectrum herself. So, there's a lot to unpack, and I'm anxious to talk to you about all the things. So, welcome to the podcast, Kylie.
Thank you, Lori.
So I guess, in getting started, your experience, I say is unique, but maybe there are a lot of people out there who have a family member on the spectrum and then end up a parent to a child or children on the spectrum too. That's a whole other theory that I have about genetics and all of that stuff. But
I know.
I just kind of wondered if you if you can explain a little bit about your relationship with your brother and growing up. I know from what you've said, he's on the higher end, if we are allowed to even say
Yep.
that anymore, of the
Yeah.
spectrum. But I'm sure there were a lot of things between the two of you since you're 2 years apart, into childhood and then into adulthood about your relationship. So do you want to tell us a little bit about Duane and your relationship with him?
Yeah. So, like, when he was younger, they didn't even really call it that much autism back then. And, like, even growing up, like, they would have probably labeled him Asperger's back then.
Hmm.
His is definitely more on the social realm. He struggled in school, he had an IEP. Um, but when I was like in my younger years, I don't remember like him being really that different. It wasn't until like I was probably in like more high school age, because we were only 2 years apart. We live in a really rural setting. And so like we were in the same, school and everything, and everybody kind of knew each other. So that's when I started to more notice like that, people were starting to kind of make fun of him, or they would be like, "Oh, what's wrong with him?" Or "Is that your brother?" Because he was pretty outgoing, and he'd always be like, "Hi, Kylie." And if he seen me in the hallway and stuff, and I would kind of be like, "Hi." But it was just kind of like awkward sometimes, as you're getting into those teen years yourself and being neurotypical myself. It was kind of like, oh, I don't want people to make fun of me. Um, but it yeah, that's when I think I more noticed that, I probably always knew something was more different, but it wasn't as noticeable then. And it was just always like, oh, Dwayne's Dwayne, you never really thought of it at all. So that is when I more noticed it,
Hmm.
when I was younger. And so
Well, being that it
yeah.
was a rural like school, was he the only person in the school that had a disability of some kind, or did he stick out more because there were very few people like him? Or
Right. So like,
okay,
yeah, it was more that he kind of more stuck out because he was more like that, and that because it wasn't as prevalent like it is now and more as well known, I think he stuck out more, like, oh, and maybe because he wasn't more on the profound side, where, and especially with autism not being like a seen disability,
correct.
that it's like, oh, why is he weird, and
Yeah.
stuff that a lot of people see. And I think sometimes people in rural areas just don't know what they don't know, especially back then. So it was kind of like, well, why is he different? And why? So it was hard, I think, yeah, in those teen years for me to like understand like how other people were going to judge me with having a brother with autism.
Hmm.
Um, but as I got older, I, more took on like, oh, I was more a protector of him.
Right.
I mean, I got told when I was younger, I kind of, protected him and watched, over him. But as I got older and like out of school, I definitely was more like, I protected him. And because he was so vulnerable socially, that I definitely took over a social or a protector role on him.
You had mentioned to me when we were talking that he had a significant amount of bullying. Was that just in school, or was that like as he graduated and was in the
Mm,
community that people were
yeah.
still, God, that's
So like,
horrible. So tell me about
yeah.
that.
So
And
yeah, he definitely got bullied. I mean, there was one incident in high school where it was in a locker room and kids were picking on him. And because he's like, isn't, definitely with autism, even being high functioning, he's, more clumsy with his body. And then he fell, he busted out his two front teeth,
oh no.
because they were messing around, all these boys in the locker room. And knowing him, he just wants to like have friends. And he
Yeah.
thinks people are just like wanting to be his friends. So he's, of course, defending them. And like, they were just playing, they're my friends. And it was like, no. And there was no repercussions for these boys that, and he had to have major mouth surgery because these were adult teeth on him and stuff. And yeah, so that was a
Oh,
bummer, that people are, taking advantage of him, and that they think he just wants to have friends pretty much. And he actually was able to go on, and he took a 2-year community course through community college. He has an AutoCAD degree in drafting.
wow.
Yes. So, and he loves what he does. He's like very dedicated to it. um, so he was at his employer, and this employer, the coworkers were, I like to say, very rude, and they actually threw down batteries all over the floor purposely to make him trip. And he did trip, and luckily he didn't get seriously hurt, but he did get hurt. And I mean, these were people in their like 30s, 40s, 50s, and they were just like,
Unbelievable.
yeah. And I was just, and didn't find out about this till later, and stuff. And they, did other things. And I understand the point. Like, I work, in that, I know like office jokes and
Yeah,
stuff
but
and
that's
pranks,
not
but
funny.
no, and this is beyond it. So that's where it was like, and if you spend any time with my brother, you know that he is neurodiverse, that it's not like a question at all. And so that they were doing it just to be rude, mean, and to try to hurt him too. So that was just a gut wrench to me. And the fact that he's like, oh, they're my friends at work.
Still, as an
And
adult, he still takes that
yes,
stance that he doesn't
yes,
recognize. Oh
yes.
man.
And it's just such a bummer. And I mean, he also like he is very set in his routines, like most autistics. And he goes to Applebee's to eat every day, eats the same thing, sits in the same place
Oh, I bet they
every
love him
day.
there. They probably
Yeah,
look for him.
well, but the thing is that some of these restaurants, that they like sell stuff for like charities and stuff. So Applebee's was putting on like a fundraiser, like if they sold so many of these, I think it was like in St. Patty's Day, and they sold these leprechaun things, that the waiters or whatever, they got like a kickback for selling them. Well, come to find out that they were selling them to my brother, and they weaseled out of him over like $1,500.
Oh my gosh, my heart is broken from high
And
school. Not,
luck,
I mean, just God.
yeah, and so, and luckily I found out about it from a family friend that worked there, and she told the workers like, "Hey, he has autism. He doesn't know," and stuff, and they still
He was a
did it to
target.
him.
Oh my
Yes, they're
gosh.
like, nope. And so then when I found out, I actually went there. I talked to the manager, and I was like, how can you do this to somebody that has autism? And, you know, this isn't right. And she outright said to me, who his, who's like his guardian, that if he doesn't have no guardian, there's no reason why we can't do this to him. And I was just, and still my brother, he was like, why did you go in and talk to them? Those are, my friends and stuff, and they like me. And so he still just wants somebody to, and it was just, it's like, I get like frustrated with him
Yeah.
because I'm like, no, these people are not your friends. They're, just out to get your money, and stuff. And he just sees it as like they're giving him attention. I'm like, no, they weren't. That's where he definitely has been taken advantage of, like that monetarily, or just even just people giving him any attention. He just sees that as like, wow, that's somebody besides family. He sees that
Yeah.
as something that he's going to gain a friendship out of that.
So does he not really have any friends, like true friends?
I mean, he does have like one or two, but it's hard to know like what their true friends, because like I know he has one friend that I feel like they're still kind of taking advantage of him, where it's a one-sided relationship.
Yeah.
They always want something out of him to like, come help him do this, come help him do that. And I'm like, well, and I mean, he found a church, but I don't want to like paint on any religion, but it's a Pentecostal church.
Hmm.
And I don't think he understands really that type of religion. And it's a very small church of only like 5 people.
Oh,
But
well,
he got,
geez.
yeah, it's in like a small little like house in a basement. But he's very, dedicated to it. And so, I mean, he finds, me and my dad like to say, like, he finds like the, I don't want to say the weirdest, but the most interesting,
Yeah.
like, people to attach to.
Well, and he has such a
And
big heart. I mean,
yes,
it sounds
he
like, and
does.
as most of our kids do, they just don't know
No,
like bad intentions on people. They don't understand it. They don't see it. They think the good in
no,
everyone, which, just hearing these stories, there's so much part of being a parent, as I know your kids are very small, but being a sibling too, you understand this. It's like as badly as we want independence for our kids. Now, my son's never going to have that because there's just so many other,
right.
he's more profound. So obviously he won't be living alone. But as much as we like constantly are like saying, I want my child to be independent. I want him to be able to, or her to be able to go to college or to do these things. But the problem is it's not them being independent, it's that the world just doesn't seem to embrace and protect kids like ours and people like your brother, because I'm so worried of all of the people who are going to be taken advantage of financially, just emotionally. They think that these people love them and are friends with them, and it's heart-wrenching to hear stories
Yeah,
like this. Does he still work at the
yeah.
same employer?
He now recently has been like kind of job hopping, because now he recently thinks like certain jobs are like, no, they're not the right one. And he thinks people like headhunt for them when he goes on to like job sites, like say like an Indeed, and say like a recruiting place calls him, and he thinks that that means that they want him and they've headhunted him out. And it's like, no, that's not what it means. He doesn't quite understand that whole part. And especially now with this job market, it's like everybody's begging for work. So he assumes that that means that, they really want me. They're calling me up. They say they looked at my resume and they want me. When can I start? So now he's job hopped for like the 2 jobs here. And then he's moved farther away, which really scares me, because he lived with my dad for up until he was in his mid 20s, and then he moved out, um and he only moved 30 minutes away, and so that was great. So he was close, and I could like check, we could all check up on him and make sure everything was okay, and he lived in an apartment. And like my dad said, he's like, because I was really adamant. I'm like, no, he can't move out. He's not gonna, like, I'm too scared. And my dad was like, Kylie, I need to make sure that when I die, he's gonna be okay. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that, and that if he's not, then, he's gonna come back, and stuff. And but now he's moved, like, it's like over 2 hours away, and he's hopefully gonna move closer with this new job that he took on and stuff. But yeah, he really gets set in his ways, and when he's gonna make a decision, he's gonna make it. There's no changing him. There's still autistic, traits that it's hard to, that deal with sometimes, and you have to work through, and yeah.
Well, I wondered if because something that's coming up in my sibling series that will be launched after our episode and conversation. Um Most of the people that I talk to, the kids that I talk to are young
Right.
adults or teenagers. And my daughter being 18, we've had a few discussions, but that's the biggest question that I get asked is when to talk to my daughter about the future. Obviously, my husband and I are not going to live forever. I am doing everything I can possibly do to prepare for Skylar's future, having a trust for him. We're trying to get him in adult programming. I'm looking into host homes or group homes, not now, but like to get him on the list that are 5 years long, just to try to have him in a place that he's happy with, that he's safe. And then my daughter hopefully can just check in on him, manage his trust when we're not here. I just don't want her to feel like she's going to have to move him into her house with her family, her young kids, whatever the scenario is, because it's not her responsibility. But I also don't want, since she's the only sibling, her brother to just be on high and dry, left in some place and nobody visits him, because that's like the most traumatic thing for everybody. So, did you have that discussion with your parents, or is it something just later in life, now that you have a family of your own and being his sibling, that you're like, listen, if he struggles on his own independently and he gets more taken advantage of, you could try to encourage him to live with you or to be closer to you? How do you
I
handle
mean,
that?
no, that, like, because I know I talked to my dad and I was like, that I had said that I had asked my brother, like, to look at his finances because I was worried, like, does he have enough money to make it and pay his bills? Because I'm just like, we don't know what we don't know. And if he's not, maybe, and especially when he was doing this job hunting, I was like, maybe I do need to look in on, possibly being like guardian on or getting on some of this stuff just in case. Um, but everything was looking good, but I said, there may come a point where I need to kind of step in a little bit more and stuff. But I think my parents are more that, he seems to be doing good by himself and able to manage well enough, since he is, that he'll kind of, fall on some things socially, but he's able to manage okay enough. Um, and I've always said, that I'm willing that he can come live with me anytime. It can be frustrating, like any autistic, that, I get frustrated with him sometimes and I'm like, but, that is just what I would want if he is struggling with anything, to know that he can come back with me. I know my dad has always said, that, well, he better know that he can come back anytime, with me too and stuff. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think it's always just an open door to know. Um, I don't know if he would ever want to, so it might, I don't know how that conversation would go. Because he very much likes his independence. Like when he comes to like gatherings, he now starts to stay a little bit longer, but he likes to go back to his place. He likes his alone time, and he's set in his schedule. So I don't know how he would do anymore with living with anybody else. Because he doesn't even like people coming to his apartment. And
Really?
no,
Messing with his
no.
stuff, like moving things
It,
around.
yeah, he just like, nope, you're not allowed to come to my apartment. Yeah.
Oh. Mm. Well, he sounds amazing, but well, I want to transition a little bit to you're the mother of 5-year-old twin girls, which is
Yes.
just awesome. My dad's a triplet, so I kind of always worried that when I got pregnant that I would end up with three all of a sudden. So, but I always wanted multiples. It just didn't work out. So you told me that they were diagnosed on the spectrum, both of them, at
Mhm.
around age 3.
Yep.
Are they differing levels of the spectrum? Are they very similar in the ways in which their autism presents? Or and did you kind of recognize anything with them?
Yeah,
early
so
on.
they are identical. So they are pretty much identical in their needs, and they
Okay.
are more I wouldn't say they're necessarily profound, but they're definitely more higher level autistic. They, for one, they were premature too. Also, I had a high risk pregnancy with them, so they were premature, born at 34 weeks. They had NICU stay, and they weren't meeting any of their needs or milestones right from the beginning. So even they always say, like, after 2 years old, if you're not meeting any of them when you're preemie, that's when you need to kind of worry. Well, they weren't meeting it, they weren't talking, they weren't walking, none of those things. Um, so I had already reached out to in Minnesota, it's called the Help Me Grow program. It's partnered with the school district and
Hmm.
with your county. Had them come out, and they were starting to work with my girls doing PT, OT, and speech
Yep.
in home therapies. Um, and right about then is when the pandemic hit.
Oh,
So then we just, yeah, got like sidetracked by that. But I was starting to feel that, like, I think there might be something more going on, because I didn't think it was just prematurity. And they were saying, doctors were saying, like, right now it's just saying like global developmental delay, since they
hmm.
were, not meeting all milestones, and just everything was delayed. But nobody wanted to say, because they were premature, it was like, it was hard to decipher, is it just the prematurity or could it be something else? And then with the pandemic hitting, nobody, we couldn't get in to see anybody, and even the services that were coming out to our house were starting to be delayed. So then I was reaching out to, like, everybody and anybody, like, we need more help. I know that they do. um so I reached out to county. I was getting on waiting lists in the Twin Cities in Minnesota about, getting diagnosed possibly. But the one funny thing is that in our small little town of 500, our elementary school had closed down many years ago, and level four, Fed 4 school had taken place of it. And within that Fed 4, an ABA center had opened up inside of it too. So um, like, nobody knew about it. It was kind of like opened up around like pandemic times. And so, like, I was calling and I'm like, hey, can I, know about this? And everybody's like, we don't know what you're talking about. No, there's not such a, like, I was talking to the Help Me Grow program, and I'm like, yeah, you guys should know about it. You're part of like this and
Yes.
stuff. And they're like, no, 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 no. We don't know what you're, and I'm like, you guys are like employed by like the same thing. And they're like, nope, nope, nope. So I finally got a hold of them, and I'm like, they're like, yep, we can put you on the waiting list, because they can actually diagnose for autism there, through that ABA center. And we got on the waiting list, and they got diagnosed. And that's when they got diagnosed at 3 years old. And then I was able to get them on the waiting list too for the center. And we waited, oh, I want to say it was almost not quite 6 months. And I mean, I was one of those mamas that I was like calling all the time, I feel like, and being
Heck
like,
yeah.
they're struggling, and we live out in a rural area. I mean, the closest town, all the towns around me that are even within a 20-mile district, or 20 miles, are 500 people. The next closest town with a grocery store is at least 30 miles away, and that's a town of 15,000. So I mean, we are talking very rural. And I knew that, if we could get into this place, it would just be magical.
Yeah.
Um, so, because they were at daycare and they were struggling. Bless my daycare lady. She was an RN who opened up a daycare, and she would just be like, yeah, they had a tough day, and I'm like, just call me, I'll come get them. No, I'll just keep them and stuff. And it was just like, I mean, but they were just struggling. We got into the ABA center then, luckily, and they've been there ever since. And I have just seen such strides in their development there. I mean,
That's
and the
great.
fact that they're only 5 miles away from me. I mean,
That was divine intervention right there.
it was.
Are they stronger physically and like with their verbalization and cognition, all those things? Or is it,
Yep.
like
So
one
we
thing
have,
comes usually at a time?
yep. So, and then, about that time that I had got on waiting list, we started then private therapy, PT, OT, and speech because I had requested for waiver services because I
Okay.
didn't know about any of these things really because like my brother wasn't on any of these types of things at all. So, yeah, so that was nice that I got those types of services and getting my girls on Medicaid also because at first I was paying for private therapy all out of pocket. And I
Hmm.
like to say like we were hemorrhaging money. It was like, but I was like, I'm willing to do anything that it takes, you know. But then when we got in, you know, Medicaid for my girls, it was like we could breathe a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was nice to start to see and just being able to understand them a little bit better and know what their wants were and not just, you know, the crying and frustration. And they are starting to now have a little bit of vocalization and we're
Okay.
working with AAC devices with them, but just like their strength and yeah, they're able to walk now. They're, I mean, write actually their names. I mean,
Aw.
I mean, I didn't even know if they'd ever walking. I mean, they weren't even walking at, you know, 2.5 years old yet. I
Hmm.
mean, that was amazing.
That's so great that you were able to get such, early intervention stuff, especially ABA so early. People can say what they want about ABA, and,
Yeah,
and for some it works really well, and others it just doesn't.
right,
It doesn't work. It's
right.
everyone does it a little differently, no matter where you live and what center you go to. But I think it's fantastic that they're making such big strides at 5 years old, and don't you think it's interesting, and I am just so glad the one aspect of social media now that I wish I would have had when Skylar was 5 years old is just the number of pages and parents with older kids telling you things. I mean, I would hope that you feel comfortable to reach out to any of the people that you follow and say, okay, I'm paying for all of this stuff out of pocket. Should I be, especially my Minnesota friends, like, should I be looking at, is there a waiver? Is there something I'm supposed to be doing? Because they don't tell you any of these things. It's
No,
frightening that the doctor's offices don't know or don't feel comfortable to say, hey, here's the diagnosis, but this is the first thing you need to do. You need to call this number and get on this waiting list for this waiver. You need to sign up for Medicaid right away. You need to do just a couple of basic things that would save you
yes,
money and trouble and get you on the lists earlier. So hopefully
yeah,
you can find people on social media that are like, girl, if you haven't called these places, you need to call today, you know?
oh yeah. I know that I even reached out to like our ABE center and I was like, you need to like help people that I wish I would have known all this stuff before I was even like when I was on the waiting list because they do like a service for people in like their family sessions. And I'm like, I could have used this when I was on the waiting list, all these services. Cause I'm like, I remember calling the county and being like, where can my girls go? They can't go to daycare anymore. Where is there a place where my girls can go? And I said, I can't drive them all the way to the Twin Cities that is over 2 hours away where there are services. Where are there services? And I said, we are not on any sort of help. We make too much money. We're not rich though. I said,
Yeah,
but we
that's the
make too
crazy
much
thing.
money.
Yeah.
That's what I always say. I'm like, we're not rich. And they're like, well, so you're if you find it, let us know, they say. And then they also said, well, so you're just looking for a handout then. And I
They
was
said
like,
that?
yeah, and I just felt so defeated. And
Oh,
I, you know, hung up and it took me another like probably 2 months before I was like, okay, there's gotta be something, you know, and that's when I found out about like the waiver and stuff like that. And like, no, there is stuff out there and they can help. But I realized, yeah, that's when I started like following more too on like social media and stuff and looking more into stuff because I was like, no, there really is stuff out there.
Mm,
And people, like I say, they're not going to lay out the silver platter for you and just tell you, here's what is available to you and really what your children need, even though there is a need for it. No, they're not going to tell you. You have to dig, or you have to get hearing it from other people and ask for it. And it's
yeah.
sad because our children don't deserve this at all. They did nothing to, be in this predicament. That's not right.
And we don't deserve it either. I mean, I can't tell you the
No.
number of people who have told me that they have second mortgaged their homes. They have,
Oh,
because, as a parent in general, you want to do anything and everything for your kids to make their lives easier and better. And I mean, I just remember when Skylar was that age, people were telling me about, and I write about this in my book too, but like Dan physicians and the hyperbaric oxygen chamber, like, you're not doing that. Oh my God, you need to do that because he'll talk. My child talked within a month of doing that. So we bought, we rented and then bought this stupid hyperbaric oxygen chamber. We did it for 2 years. Not a peep came out of my kid. I just feel we are so vulnerable,
oh
kind
yeah.
of like your brother, but we are willing to do and pay
Oh yeah.
anything to help our kids not suffer and struggle. And people take such advantage of us because we're willing to do that. The other thing too is with the waivers, it's not just to get on the list for the waivers, but it took me a while to really dig and find out what the waiver actually is. Because the waiver we're on, there's another one that is we can't get on unless I'm 80, unless Skylar's parents are deceased and he doesn't have anyone to take care of him. The third criteria is that he has significant medical needs where he would need to go to the hospital weekly
Right.
and like get transfusions or whatever. Those are the three criteria to allow him to be on the larger waiver, which covers everything. The waiver we get, it's 50 hours a month of respite. We have no respite providers. That would be me.
No.
I am the respite
Yep.
provider, the paid respite provider. And really, other than that, it's like if we can find music therapy, it'll cover that. But that only covers like maybe that number of hours gets switched to a different pay rate. And then so that entitles him to maybe once a week for 4 times a month for music therapy if we can find it, or recreational therapy, or it's just the little peanuts of things that aren't valuable to him. So while I'm glad we're on the waiver, it really does nothing for us at this point, and I wouldn't have fought 10 years to get on it necessarily if I could have done something else and put my time elsewhere. Anyway, all that to say, it's just there's so much underlying information that is not relevant or prevalent to us when we sign up for all these things because
Oh,
we
I
don't know
know.
what we're signing up for half the
I
time.
know.
Oh man, does they have the waiver now, your girls?
Yep. They both
It,
have the waiver.
and what does
Yep.
that cover for them? Does it cover all of their therapies and things?
So actually their Medicaid covers most of their therapies.
Well, that's good.
Um, and the waiver mostly is so then like I can if I do need some respite, which is usually like maybe my mom is retired, so she will help out sometimes with like, because my husband is gone, like I would say 75% of the time he works construction, so he's gone. So I'm like I like to say I'm like a single parent. Um so with his construction season, yeah, he's gone. And so and then I do work. So I mean, and that's like unheard of too with kids with special needs. I've found out too with because when I say, well, I still work, and they're like, oh, I get
You're a
that a lot. And
unicorn.
I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, well, yeah, and I'm like, I still try to make it work, and
I got to
I'm
pay for
like,
all this stuff somehow. I can't just sit
yeah,
here.
but yeah, I've realized that, and I understand that because a lot of parents can't make it work. But I
Yeah.
I do medical coding, so I have a little bit more flexibility. But I realized that a lot of parents would not be able to make this work because of if they had, like, if my husband was a single dad, he would not be able to make this work at all because his schedule. I mean, the times that I've gotten called from school or the therapies they need, it's like he would not be able to make this work if
Hmm.
you have, a normal job that you need to be there and don't have the flexibility, you cannot make this work. So in Minnesota, on certain waivers, you can have paid parent where you get paid to, take care of your child. So that can help, significantly with some. But I mean, it's still just, it's not, right now we're battling to try to get a fence for my girls because they elope. But I
Oh,
mean, it's still a battle on that kind of stuff with waiver services to, and it's like, we just want to be able to go outside
yeah.
safely.
It's not like you're just trying to get the state to pay for your fence. It's like there's
No,
a real reasonable need that
there's a need.
we shouldn't be
Yeah.
stuck in our house. Yeah. That's the
No.
stuff
And
people don't
especially when
understand.
there's two with the exact same needs and they go opposite direction.
Yeah, man, that's a lot. Two little, two little wiry 5-year-olds having to chase all the time. So does your brother, he's far enough away? Is he far enough away that he can't visit you guys often, or does he visit? I just wonder what
Usually
his
now,
relationship is like with the girls,
I
if
mean,
he,
even when he was close, he really likes to kind of keep to himself. But like, say that I were to just be like, "Hey, can you come over?" He would drop a hat and come. That's the
aw,
thing about him. He's so sweet like that. Um, but most of the time, I know he likes to just kind of be by himself and he's in his ways. Like Thanksgiving is coming up,
right.
and he usually comes for all holidays or birthdays because, I invite him and it's always at my house. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, I'm thinking of Thanksgiving. Would you rather prefer, I'm asking people Thursday or Saturday would work out?" And he's like, "Well, Saturday would work better for me." And I said, "Oh, what do you have going on Saturday?" And he said, "Well, I'm deep cleaning my house." And I was like, "Oh, well, that really probably isn't like a set in stone thing that I think you can move that around." "Yeah, I guess I could." He said.
I'm gonna have to really think this through.
Yeah, I was like, I
Aw.
was thinking like you had something booked, more, but yeah, that's where, I gotta, with his autism that, that was, set in stone on the calendar, deep cleaning his apartment to,
Well, at least he cleans. I mean, you gotta give him that.
he doesn't have like nothing in his apartment too. Like he wouldn't even let, like we wanted him to have like a table and stuff. Nope. And he gives everything you give to him back to Goodwill too.
Oh,
We're like, "Well, we would rather have that back instead of you giving that to Goodwill." And he's like, "Well, it's gone now."
you should get him to give it back to you, and then you guys just keep regifting it back to him, like
I
every
know. Yeah.
every time. Just go back and forth. I just was
Yeah.
curious, and they're probably too young at this point, but it'd be interesting to see the kind of relationship he has with them, because I would imagine, as mature and independent as he is, he's very childlike. It sounds, like, and that's one of the things that I used to despise, kind of, but I love about my son too. Being 20, his favorite show is still Elmo's World. It probably always will be. So I just wonder, when little kids are around an adult like that who loves the same things, little kid things, if there's just a connection there that maybe we don't see or understand, but it's just a bond between them.
Yeah.
So
So, so like my girls can't be like conversational yet. And I
right.
mean, they're mostly like, they do a lot of echolalia where it's repeating what, whatever you say.
Yeah.
Um, but my son or my brother really loves like Disney movies or Marvel movies. And he's loved them ever since he's been a kid. So, I mean, he could repeat anything of those movies. And so he can actually hold a conversation a lot with even my son, who's 12 years old. And but even now, my son, who's 12 years old, he's starting to get kind of almost like, you know, uh, Uncle Beaner, as we like to call him. That's his nickname. And he's like, he's kind of different, or what he said was like, his joke was kind of different. Like he's starting to understand that, he's, and we've explained to my son Griffin that, Beaner does have autism just like your sisters do. And he's like, "Oh," but I'm like, he doesn't have quite the same autism as um your sisters. And so, but when my son was younger, he definitely would gravitate towards my son, who is neurotypical, and would play a lot with my son. And yeah, he would more gravitate towards little kids and
Yeah.
play with them a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Because adults are mean. They've proven to be
Yeah.
mean to him. Gosh, poor Duane. So um you mentioned your son. So is he at 12, is he kind of in that space now where he can kind of understand the spectrum is vast and that, like you explained, your uncle is kind of on one end and your sisters right now are on a different level, and because we you just don't know where they're gonna end up. They may do exactly
Yeah.
like your brother, have independent lives, go to college, do all the things.
Right.
It's but how does he feel? Because I mean, he's kind of like, the only one not on the spectrum when it comes to these
Yeah. So
conversations.
I think he sees my brother, his uncle, as different than his sisters. Like he just sees, because like his is more high functioning. He sees him as different than his girls or his sisters, and he is so protective over his sisters. And he honestly is like, he is so much of a help to me,
Oh, that's
because with
great.
my husband being gone a lot, I mean, there's so many times where he is so protective. He, he just doesn't skip a beat on stuff, on, you know, when I mean, I don't even ask for help on stuff, and he is just right there helping. When we were really in the thick of bad elopement, I mean, he was running across stuff to get them, and they still will, but I mean, he was running right with me, and, he was, you know, right there with my eyes, and like, Mom, Greta's here, Mom, Ganessa's here, or I mean, yeah, it was like having a second me. And yeah, I just think of all the empathy he has for stuff like that. And I hope that, it branches out beyond his sisters, that he sees other neurodiverse or people with special needs outside of just our home and in the community. I hope he has the same empathy too, because I'm not always with him, and I hope he can still see that and give that same empathy to those people too.
Oh, I'm sure he absolutely will. And, without even knowing it, you've modeled that for him in just your interactions with your brother. He's seen that since he was little, and
Right.
how you, talk to your brother and just how you protect him too. And so I think he came by it naturally, I would imagine, with his sisters. It's got to be so comforting for you to have him there so you can make dinner, you can whatever, and you know that somebody's got their eye on those little girls too.
Yes.
So I'm sure that's really helpful. Um, because you have both experiences as a parent and as a sibling, is there anything that you would want people to understand? And maybe even it comes down to how you're raising your son. Obviously he's empathetic and he's picking up on that stuff too. But I think one of the things we struggle with as parents is making sure that our neurotypical children feel just as valued and important and given as the same amount of attention, which we know isn't always possible because sometimes our kids on the spectrum take so much more energy and time from us than we have to give. So growing up in a home where your brother might have needed a little bit extra, coaching on situations and things, and now having a son that's neurotypical, is there anything that your parents did that you would try to emulate with your son, just so that he doesn't feel like it's his job to always look after his sisters and that he can kind of have a life of his own like you did? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So like, yeah, it is quite unreal to like think like my son is kind of living like the same life I did,
Hmm.
essentially. Even though his sisters do have, a lot more difficulties than my brother did. And I just hope that, because like I definitely, I feel like I've grown up and seen, and have a lot more empathy for people. Um, and I hope that he can have that same type of empathy as he grows up. Um, and can, elude that in all his life. You know, that's what my hope is. And, I like to think too that, as seeing, my brother and seeing my girls who are more severe, you know, it's interesting too to see that, so many people are like that, oh, I wish that, my child could talk, or I wish, my child could, on so many different ends of the spectrum. And I feel like, I've seen, kind of a little bit more of the different ends of the spectrum. And I'm like, there, it's not necessarily good or bad, but it's like there can be, you take with both ends when you get both ends, because my brother struggled so much socially and still does, where if my girls don't really gain much more and they still need a lot more help, they're not going to have that type of difficulties like my brother does in
Hmm.
life, in later, and probably in school or later in life, that my my brother does, where and it's, so I mean, there is give and take on those types of things, where we wish and wish and wish for certain things with our neurodiverse children or family members, but you know we get so much from each one in their different abilities too.
Yeah, it's hard not to compare. And I think that
Oh, I
is the
know, because
one sad
I
part
do
of
it
social
myself
media.
too.
Yes.
Like with my girls, I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, I wish, because I do it too. But yet, yeah, I see it so many times with, yeah, my brother, and I'm like, oh, but look at how much he struggled with this. But yet, yeah, it's so
Yeah,
hard.
no, I agree with you. I think that that is the hard part. I think that's what I was trying to get to earlier, is that we want so many things for our kids. And the biggest one that I hear and that I've even felt throughout the years is, I just want him to be independent. I just want him to be able to do things for himself and not rely on us so much. Not because I don't want to do it, but because I'm sure he's a grown adult now, and I'm sure he's sick and tired of me showering him, and like he
Yeah,
probably wants to do it for himself. But on the flip side of that, I don't have to worry about him being at a job and getting picked on and injured and teased like your brother is going through, and not have a concept that people are being cruel to him. Like I
right.
can kind of keep him in my little bubble,
Yeah,
and there's a benefit to that, I guess,
I
if I
know.
have to
And
pick
that's how I
one.
feel about, yeah, I feel that
Hmm.
about my girls. Like, I mean, I can protect them and they don't know yet, and that's almost like what I want to feel like sometimes about my brother. Like, I want to rein him back in and be like, I want to protect you, and stuff. But yeah, it's a hard medium to deal with.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully you can still do that, like by the ways that you have said, like just kind of peeking at his finances, just making sure things are good without being intrusive, and
Yeah,
second guessing that he's able to do it on his own. And however that happens, but you can still kind of keep your pulse on him and how he's doing. So yeah, gosh, well, I've been really enjoyed talking to you, and it's just, again, like you said, it's just so interesting that you have so many levels of experience and different ends of the spectrum, and with relationships in your sibling life, and now as a mom and all these other things. So you've been through the gamut. So you probably could share a lot of advice to a lot of people too, if they had any questions for you. But I just appreciate your transparency and your time to share your family's story.
yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I hope that the girls continue to make strong improvements in their, cognition and communication and physical abilities, and that they don't run you ragged, literally. You get
Right.
that fence put in place. Oh, goodness. Well, take care. And again, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.